This story is titled, While I Was Away for Work, My Stepmom Called, saying I took the money from your college fund and gave it to your stepsister. She's better than you, I calmly replied. Thanks for letting me know when she saw my next move. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey Reddit, I've been meaning to post about this for a while, but it's taken me years to even wrap my head around everything that went down. My family situation is, well, let's just say it's not the healthiest. Here's a bit of backstory to get us started. So, my name's Cassidy. I'm 28 now, but this all started when I was 16. My mom passed away from cancer. She was my everything. Strong, independent, and the hardest worker I've ever known. She ran her own home renovation business and was really good at it. Like, she wasn't just flipping houses, she was designing them from scratch, making them beautiful, and selling them for way more than she bought them for. Before she passed, she made sure I'd be set for the future. She started a college fund for me, enough to cover tuition, books, and whatever else I'd need to get through school. My mom didn't believe in just enough. She wanted to make sure I'd never have to stress about money while pursuing my dreams. But life doesn't exactly care about plans. After Mom passed, everything fell apart. My dad married Shannon about 2 years later. Shannon came with her daughter, Brooke, who was 13 at the time. From the second they moved in, it was obvious I was getting edged out. However, before my mom passed, my dad and I were inseparable. He wasn't just my dad. He was my rock, my biggest cheerleader. I still remember him standing in the crowd at my middle school science fair, cheering louder than anyone else when I won first place. "That's my girl," he'd said, beaming with pride. He used to spend hours helping me with my school projects, even if it meant staying up late after a long day of work. When Mom got sick, he tried his best to hold it together. I'll never forget the night he sat on the edge of my bed, telling me everything was going to be okay, even though we both knew it wasn't. He was the one who encouraged me to focus on school, to keep dreaming big even when the world felt like it was falling apart. But after Mom passed, something shifted. He became quieter, more distant. At first, I thought it was just grief, but when Shannon came into the picture, it felt like he was slipping away completely. Shannon wasn't mean to my face, but she had this way of making me feel like I didn't belong in my own home. She was constantly praising Brooke, talking about how smart and talented she was, while barely acknowledging me. Brooke was spoiled to a ridiculous degree. Designer clothes, lavish birthday parties, private lessons for everything from tennis to horseback riding. And if anyone dared question it, Shannon would hit you with her favorite line. Brooke deserves the same opportunities as Cassidy. At first, the comments were subtle, almost offhanded. "It's so nice that Cassidy has that college fund," Shannon said one night over dinner, her tone light and conversational. "I just wish Brooke had something like that to look forward to. It would take such a weight off my shoulders." My dad nodded absent-mindedly, not realizing what she was implying, but I caught it. I ignored her, thinking it was a one-off comment. It wasn't. The more she learned about the fund, the bolder she became. "It's so unfair," she said one afternoon, sitting in the living room with my dad while I was passing through. I was there during school winter break. "Brooke's just as deserving as Cassidy, don't you think? Maybe it's something we should talk about, redistributing things a little. It's not like Cassidy needs all that money, right?" I stopped in my tracks, my jaw tightening. "The fund is for my education," I said, trying to stay calm. "Mom set it up for me. It's not about fairness." Shannon smiled, that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "Of course, sweetheart. I just think that since you're on scholarship, maybe there's room to help Brooke out a little too. We're all family now, after all." She said it so casually, like I was the unreasonable one for not immediately agreeing. My dad, as usual, stayed quiet. He never outright supported her, but he didn't shut her down either. It wasn't just talk either. Shannon started questioning me about it directly, like she was testing the waters. "You're doing so well with that scholarship, Cassidy. Have you thought about letting some of the fund go to Brooke? It's not like you need all of it, right?" I'd always respond the same way, cutting her off as politely as I could. "The fund is for my education, Shannon." Mom made that clear. Her tone would always shift, her smile sharpening. "Your mom would want you to help Brooke. She wouldn't want you to be selfish." That line, "your mom would want this," was what stung the most. Shannon hadn't even known my mom, yet she threw her name around like she had any right to speak for her. As time went on, Shannon's campaign became less subtle. Do you really think it's fair for one child to have everything while the other struggles? She said one evening, louder this time, like she wanted my dad to hear. I mean, Cassidy's practically set. She's got the grades, the scholarship, everything. Brooke's the one who really needs support. I glared at her across the table. Brooke doesn't need my money, Shannon. She's already getting everything handed to her. Shannon's face hardened, but she kept her tone sweet. It's not your money, Cassidy. It's the family's money. Your mom didn't set that fund up so you could hoard it. She wanted to give you opportunities. I'm just saying it's time to spread those opportunities around. I could feel my dad shifting uncomfortably in his seat, but he still didn't speak up. That hurt more than anything Shannon said. He was supposed to protect what mom had left behind, not let Shannon twist it into something it wasn't. She even started bringing Brooke into the conversation. Cassidy, you're so lucky to have that fund, Brooke said one afternoon while scrolling through her phone. It's not like I'd use it for anything big. I'd just love to do more with my horseback riding lessons, you know? It was infuriating. Brooke didn't even try to hide how entitled she felt. To her, the fund wasn't something sacred or meaningful. It was just another way to fund her hobbies and lifestyle. But the breaking point for me came at my high school graduation. I'd worked so hard to get there, graduating at the top of my class, landing that scholarship, juggling school and a part-time job to help out. I thought, for sure, this would be a moment where my dad would show up and be proud of me. Instead, Shannon convinced him not to come. Brooke needs her father right now, she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. She's not feeling well, and you know how she gets when she's sick. A cold. Brooke had a cold, and my dad missed one of the biggest milestones of my life because of it. That night, after the ceremony, I packed my things and left. I didn't make a scene. I just told my dad I was moving out. I'll be fine, I said, my voice tight. Good luck with everything. He didn't try to stop me. Maybe he thought I was being dramatic, or maybe he didn't care enough to fight. Either way, I never came back. I went abroad for college, threw myself into my studies, and basically lived off ramen and part-time jobs to cover my expenses. I didn't touch the college fund because I didn't want to deal with Shannon. The less she knew about my life, the better. Meanwhile, back home, things got even worse. Shannon was using my dad like her personal ATM. Brooke got a brand new car for her 16th birthday, had these insane birthday parties, and went on vacations to places I couldn't even afford to Google. Shannon kept up her little campaign about how the college fund was unfair, but I didn't care. As far as I knew, the money was still safe. By the time I graduated college, I was working full-time as a marketing analyst and doing pretty well for myself. I kept my distance from Shannon and Brooke, only visiting home on holidays because, honestly, every time I went back, it was like walking into a Brooke appreciation parade. Shannon would gush about her accomplishments. She made a TikTok that got 500 likes once, while barely acknowledging my existence. My dad, he didn't say much. He'd try to act like everything was normal, but I could see it in his face. He knew things weren't right. He just didn't want to rock the boat. I tried to brush it off because I thought, what can they even do? The college fund's in my name. It's safe. I was wrong. So here's what happened. I was in my hotel room halfway across the country for a work trip when Shannon called. The moment I heard her voice, I knew it wasn't going to be good. She didn't even try to ease into it. I took your college fund, all of it, she said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I gave it to Brooke. She deserves it more than you. For a second, I couldn't even process the words. Took my college fund? Gave it to Brooke? My mom's college fund, the one she busted her ass to save for me, was just gone? I didn't say anything at first. Shannon kept talking, her voice dripping with smugness, like she'd just pulled off the heist of the century. Your dad signed off on it, she added casually, like it was no big deal. He understands that Brooke needs it more than you do. That stopped me cold. My dad? I couldn't believe it. He'd never been one to meddle with my mom's money, and we'd had clear conversations about how sacred that college fund was. Something wasn't adding up. Brooke needs the money to maintain her lifestyle, she added. Lifestyle. That word hit different. You've got a job, don't you? You didn't even use that money for college anyway. That's when it clicked. All those designer outfits Brooke showed off online, the photos of her sipping drinks by the pool at five-star resorts, the brand new BMW she'd been flaunting, that wasn't Shannon's money. It was my mom's money. The money my mom worked for, saved for, and left for me. And Shannon just handed it over to Brooke like it was a gift card. Here's the thing, though. I didn't lose it. I mean, yeah, I was furious, like shaking from anger furious, but I didn't let it show. Okay, thanks for letting me know. I said calmly and hung up. I could almost imagine Shannon sitting there, waiting for me to scream or cry or beg. That's what she wanted. She wanted me to break down so she could feel justified, like she was the good guy in all this. But I wasn't giving her that satisfaction. What Shannon didn't know was that I'd been keeping an eye on her for months. About 6 months before this call, I got a heads up from my mom's old lawyer. The call came completely out of the blue. I've been getting some unusual activity on the account, he said, his tone cautious. Unusual activity? I asked, confused. What do you mean? Well, there have been some inquiries about the fund, he explained. Questions about how it's structured, whether it's still active, and how withdrawals work. Who's asking? I pressed, my stomach tightening. That's the thing, he said hesitantly. The inquiries were anonymous, through a third party. I can't tell exactly who's behind it. Something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me. Do you think it's serious? At this point, it could be nothing, he said carefully. But I wanted to give you a heads up, just in case. At the time, I didn't know what to make of it. The idea of someone targeting the account felt strange, almost paranoid. Shannon had always been weirdly obsessed with my mom's money, but I figured even she wouldn't cross that line. I brushed it off as someone being nosy, a glitch in the system maybe. The lawyer suggested taking precautionary measures, but I didn't. I told myself the account was secure, and I didn't want to go down the rabbit hole of worrying about something that might not even be real. Now? Now I realized that was a mistake. Shannon had been plotting this for a long time, and we'd been too trusting to see it coming. After I hung up the phone with Shannon, I sat there for a moment, letting everything sink in. Shannon had actually done it. She'd found a way to steal my mom's money and hand it over to Brooke. And Brooke? She didn't even hesitate to spend it. As reality settled in, flashes of my mom's face swirled in my mind. I remembered how hard she'd worked for that money, how she'd always talked about the college fund like it was her greatest accomplishment. "This is for you, Cassidy," she'd say, her voice full of pride. "So you never have to feel trapped. You'll always have choices." And now? Shannon had waltzed in and decided that legacy belonged to Brooke instead. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. It wasn't just about the money, although yeah, that was a big part of it. It was about the principle. I could hear my mom's voice in my head, calm and firm, the way she'd been when she taught me how to stand up for myself. "Don't let anyone take advantage of you, Cassidy," she used to say. "And don't let anyone take what's rightfully yours." Shannon had done exactly that. She might have fooled my dad, might have even convinced herself that what she was doing was fair, but I knew better. The anger burned hotter with every passing second. Brooke's smug Instagram posts came rushing back to me, her posing in front of her shiny new car with the caption, "Big moves, big rewards." Her lounging by a resort pool. None of it was hers. Not a single part of it. Shannon might have been good at manipulating my dad, but when it came to pulling off a scheme like this, she wasn't as smart as she thought she was. She'd left a trail, and I was ready to follow it. The first thing I did was call my mom's lawyer. It was late, but I didn't care. The moment he picked up, I launched into everything Shannon had done. "She called you to brag about it?" he asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Yeah," I said. "She was acting like it was her money to give away." "Well, that's going to make things a lot easier for us," he said. I could hear him shuffling papers on his end of the line as he explained the safeguards we'd put in place. Every single transaction was documented. Every email, every forged signature, every phone call. Shannon might have thought she was untouchable, but the evidence painted a different picture. "We've got her," the lawyer said confidently. "She doesn't stand a chance." The next few days passed in a blur. The lawyer sent me copies of the documents, and I spent hours going through them one by one. Each piece of evidence felt like a slap, a reminder of just how far Shannon had gone to take what wasn't hers. There were forged forms with my dad's shaky signature at the bottom, signatures she'd clearly faked, emails where she pretended to be me, spinning some sob story about needing urgent access to the account, phone call logs where she lied to the bank, claiming she had full authorization. But the worst part? Seeing how fast the money was spent. Brooke hadn't wasted a single second. Within weeks of the transfer, she'd blown through tens of thousands of dollars. Charges for luxury hotels, designer boutiques, spa treatments, and a down payment on her new car filled the statements. It wasn't just reckless, it was disgusting. A memory of my mom flooded back, uninvited. I was 13, sitting in the passenger seat of her old sedan. She'd just finished a big project and had a check for what I thought was a ton of money. "Are we going to buy a new car now?" I'd asked, excited at the thought of upgrading from our beat-up ride. She'd smiled at me, shaking her head. Not yet, sweetheart. This is going to your college fund. A car can wait. Your future can't. Now that money, her hard-earned sacrifices, had been reduced to Brooke's shopping spree fund. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed. The lawyer assured me we had an airtight case, but that wasn't enough for me. I needed to see Shannon's face when the truth came out. I needed her to understand that she hadn't won. I booked a flight home and started planning my next move. As I packed my bag, I laid out everything I'd need: copies of the forged documents, transaction logs, and the emails Mr. Decker had sent me. If Shannon thought she could talk her way out of this, she was dead wrong. I wasn't just confronting her, I was shutting her down. I arrived home late on a Friday night, unannounced. I didn't want anyone to have time to prepare excuses or spin stories. This was going to happen on my terms. The house felt alien as I stepped inside. It wasn't mine anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. The sound of laughter floated out from the kitchen, grating against my nerves. I walked toward it, each step solidifying my resolve. Cassidy? My dad's voice came from behind me. He was on the stairs, his face creased with confusion. What are you doing here? We need to talk, I said coldly. Where's Shannon? She's in the kitchen. Is everything okay? He asked, his tone cautious, like he already suspected the answer. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I walked into the kitchen. Shannon was sitting at the table with Brooke, scrolling through her phone. Neither of them noticed me at first. Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence, Shannon said, smirking. She didn't even try to hide her irritation. I didn't waste time. I set my laptop on the counter and opened the folder Mr. Decker had sent me. We're going to have a little chat. Shannon raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Oh, this should be good. What's got your panties in a twist now, Cassidy? I turned the laptop screen toward her. Explain this. She barely glanced at it, leaning back in her chair. Explain what? That you're paranoid? Seriously, grow up. You've been hoarding that fund like a greedy little brat for years. Brooke deserves better. I clenched my jaw, my anger bubbling to the surface. You stole from me, Shannon. You forged Dad's signature, lied to the bank, and funneled my mom's money into your joint account with Brooke. That fund wasn't yours to touch. Shannon rolled her eyes, her smirk growing wider. So what? You didn't even need it. You're so high and mighty with your scholarships and job. Meanwhile, Brooke was struggling. Don't act like you're the victim here. You've had everything handed to you. I stepped closer. You think you've won, don't you? I said, leaning closer. You've spent years treating my mom's legacy like your personal piggy bank. But here's the thing, Shannon. You don't just get to walk away. The bank knows. The court will know. And when I'm done, you'll wish you'd never touched a single penny, and you'll be lucky if you're not out barking on the street. Shannon's face hardened, and she let out a bitter laugh. Oh, screw you and your dead saint of a mother, she spat. She always thought she was better than everyone, just like you. Well, guess what, Cassidy? She's gone, and her money is mine now. Do whatever the hell you want. I'm not scared of you. Brooke finally looked up from her phone, her face red. Why are you being such a brat, Cassidy? Mom was just trying to help me. God, you've always been jealous of me. Jealous, I said, incredulous. Jealous of what? A spoiled, entitled brat who blows through money like it's Monopoly cash? You didn't even ask where the money came from, did you? Brooke crossed her arms, defensive. Why would I? Mom said it was for us. How was I supposed to know? Because you didn't care, I snapped. As long as you got what you wanted, the truth didn't matter. My dad walked into the room, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 5 minutes. What's going on? He asked, his voice shaking. Your wife stole my college fund, I said, turning to him. She forged your name, lied to the bank, and funneled the money into her account. Look for yourself. I slid the laptop toward him, and he stared at the screen, his hands trembling as he scrolled through the documents. The forged forms, the emails, the transaction logs. This can't be real, he said, looking up at Shannon. You did this? So what if I did? Shannon shot back, her voice dripping with venom. I was doing what you should have done, taking care of Brooke. You've been useless since Evelyn died, and someone had to step up. My dad looked like he'd been slapped. You lied to me. You forged my name. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Shannon sneered. It's not like she even needed the money. She's just mad she doesn't get to hoard it anymore. I stepped in, refusing to let her get the last word. This isn't over, Shannon. The bank flagged all of this as fraud. My lawyer's already filed a lawsuit, and the evidence is airtight. You're going to pay back every cent, and when I'm done with you, there won't be a dime left to your name. For the first time, Shannon's smirk faltered. You're bluffing, she said, but there was uncertainty in her voice. Try me, I said, my voice cold. Shannon slammed her hands on the table, standing up. You ungrateful little bitch, she hissed. I've done more for this family than you ever have. You think you're so perfect, don't you? Well, newsflash, Cassidy. You're not. You're just like your mother, clinging to money like it's all that matters. You can rant and rave all you want, I said, but it doesn't change anything. You're finished, Shannon. Enjoy what little time you have left with your lifestyle. Shannon cursed under her breath and stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. My dad stood frozen, still staring at the documents. I didn't know, he said finally, his voice hollow. I didn't know she was doing this. I tried to tell you, I said, my voice breaking. For years, I tried to tell you what she was like, but you didn't want to see it. He didn't respond, just kept shaking his head like he couldn't believe what was in front of him. For once, he couldn't argue. The truth was staring him in the face, and it wasn't going away. Shannon's joint account with Brooke was frozen, and the bank began investigating. The evidence was so overwhelming that Shannon didn't even try to deny it anymore. Instead, she started blaming everyone else, me, the bank, even my dad. Meanwhile, I worked with my mom's lawyer to prepare for the lawsuit. Every forged signature, every fraudulent transaction, every lie Shannon told was laid out in black and white. She had no defense. Over the next few days, things escalated. Shannon and Brooke had spent years making me feel like I didn't belong in my own family. And now I was about to flip the script. They wanted to play the victim? Fine. But this time, everyone was going to see exactly who they were and what they'd done. The lawsuit itself was straightforward. The lawyer had all the evidence we needed. There was no denying what had happened, and Shannon knew it. The tricky part wasn't proving the fraud. It was dealing with the fallout at home. My dad was still reeling. He spent days walking around the house like a ghost, barely talking, barely eating. He didn't defend Shannon, but he didn't confront her either. That was his pattern. He avoided conflict until it was too late to fix anything. Meanwhile, Shannon's behavior went from defensive to downright delusional. She's blowing this out of proportion, I overheard her telling my dad one morning. Cassidy doesn't even need that money. She's got a good job, a great life. Brooke needed a chance, and I gave it to her. A chance? I said, stepping into the room. You mean designer clothes, luxury vacations, and a brand new car? That's what you call giving her a chance? Shannon spun around, her face flushed. You don't understand. No, I interrupted. I understand perfectly. You've been stealing from me for years, and now you're trying to justify it. But it's over, Shannon. Everyone knows what you did. She opened her mouth to argue, but my dad finally stepped in. Enough, he said quietly, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Shannon, just stop. I've seen the documents. I've seen everything. You lied to me. You lied to everyone. For a moment, Shannon looked like she might fight back. But then she caught the look in his eyes, and whatever fight she had left disappeared. She stormed out of the room, muttering under her breath about how ungrateful I was. The real breaking point came later that week. My lawyer had filed the lawsuit, and the bank's fraud department was involved now. Shannon couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore, not when her accounts were frozen and creditors were calling. Brooke tried to reach out. She didn't just send a message, she unleashed a torrent of insults and excuses, peppered with curses aimed squarely at me. You're a stingy little brat, one line read. You've always acted like you're better than us. Mom was just trying to level the playing field, and now you're ruining our lives. She kept going, claiming she had no idea the money was stolen. I thought Mom was just helping me, she wrote, like that was supposed to make it better. This isn't my fault, so stop acting like you're some victim. I didn't bother replying. What was the point? Brooke clearly wasn't looking for a resolution. She wanted someone to blame, and I wasn't about to be her scapegoat. A few days later, I sat down with my dad. I could tell he was struggling. He kept fidgeting with his hands, avoiding eye contact. But I needed answers, and I wasn't going to let him off the hook this time. Dad, I said, how did you not see this happening? How did you not notice what Shannon was doing? He sighed and leaned back in his chair. I don't know, he admitted. I guess I just wanted to believe everything was okay. After your mom died, I didn't know how to handle anything. Shannon, she made it easy. She took over everything, and I let her. I wanted to be angry, but the truth was, I felt sorry for him. He'd been manipulated just as much as I had, maybe even more. Dad, I said softly, you can't keep ignoring things like this. Shannon didn't just steal from me. She betrayed you too. He nodded slowly, tears welling up in his eyes. I'm sorry, Cassidy. I should have seen it. I should have stopped it. It's not too late, I said. You can still make things right. That night, my dad confronted Shannon for the last time. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard the aftermath. The shouting, the slamming doors, the sound of suitcases being dragged down the stairs. By morning, Shannon and Brooke were gone. My dad told me he'd asked them to leave and that he was filing for divorce. She can't stay here after what she's done, he said, his voice heavy with regret. I won't let her hurt you or this family anymore. It was a start. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Shannon tried to stall the lawsuit, but it didn't work. The evidence was too strong, and she had no way to fight back. By the time we went to court, she was barely holding it together. She tried to paint herself as a victim, claiming she only took the money to balance the scales and give Brooke the life she deserved. But the judge wasn't buying it. You didn't take this money out of necessity, the judge said during the hearing. You took it out of greed. Hearing those words felt like vindication. For the first time in years, someone was holding Shannon accountable for her actions. The ruling came down swiftly. Shannon was ordered to pay back every cent, plus damages. Brooke's accounts were frozen, and their flashy lifestyle came crashing down overnight. The cars, the vacations, the luxury, they were all gone, replaced with silence. I thought I'd feel triumphant, but what I really felt was relief. It wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine, what my mom had worked so hard to give me. Getting the money back felt like closing one chapter, but there was still so much to process. Life doesn't just snap back into place after something like this. I had to go back to work, back to my life across the country, where the responsibilities I'd put on hold were piling up. The day after the court ruling, I packed my things and said goodbye to my dad. You're leaving already? He asked, his voice tinged with sadness. I have to, I said softly. Work's been waiting long enough, but I'll visit. We're not done rebuilding, Dad. This is just a pause. He nodded, but his shoulders slumped. I understand. I've missed so much already. I don't want to miss more. His words stayed with me on the flight back. The old version of me would have been angry. Angry that it had taken him this long to say something. Angry at the years lost. But now, I realized we were both trying, in our own ways. Back at work, things were hectic. I threw myself into my projects, meeting deadlines and catching up with clients. But in the quiet moments, my mind drifted back to everything that had happened. The confrontation with Shannon, the betrayal, the resolution, and my dad. I started calling him more often, checking in even when I didn't feel like it. At first, the conversations were stilted, filled with awkward pauses and tentative questions. How's work? He'd ask, and I'd give him a short answer. Busy, I'd say, then ask how he was holding up. I'm trying, he'd reply. The house feels different now, empty, but in a good way. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A few months later, I went back to visit. The house felt quieter, calmer. Shannon's chaotic energy was gone, and for the first time in years, it felt like a place where I could breathe. Dad and I sat in the living room, a pot of coffee between us. He looked older, the lines on his face deeper than I remembered, but there was a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. I've been thinking about your mom a lot lately, he said, breaking the silence. About what she would have wanted, about how I let her down. And you too. Dad, I started, but he held up a hand. Let me finish, he said. For years, I convinced myself that I was doing the best I could, but I wasn't. I let Shannon take over because it was easier than dealing with my own grief. And you paid the price for that. I'm so sorry, Cassidy. I didn't know what to say at first. The words I'd been waiting to hear for so long were finally out in the open, and all I could do was nod. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, he continued, but I want to do better. I want to be the father you deserve, even if it's taken me too long to get here. I felt the anger and hurt start to melt away. I want that too, Dad, I said, my voice shaking, but it's going to take time. And that's where we left it. A pot of coffee, a promise to try, and years of pain slowly starting to untangle. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild something real. Mom's memory deserved that. Healing doesn't happen overnight, but at least now I wasn't carrying the weight of it alone.